If you want to listen to me talk about this show with my friend Malik, check out our podcast in the link in the corner and in the description. Let me preface this by saying that yes, I've seen the weird quotes or whatever from interviews by Kari Skogland and Malcolm Spellman that imply that they don't fully understand the characters that they've been working with, and yeah, that sucks, but I really don't care. What's on the screen is what's on the screen, and how I look at what's on the screen is what I'm here to talk about. Author's words be damned. Look, man, I've had a long week. I ain't been feeling too hot, I'm stressed all the time. I've long been at the stage where doing this video feels like a chore, and honestly, you guys, I'm dying. The last thing I need is to muddy my experience with this show or make this video longer by getting hung up on after-the-fact comments, and I recommend you take the same track. Anyway, consider this my analysis of the finale with some peppering in of where I fall on the series as a whole. Not to say this is comprehensive, but I don't want to promise a full series retrospective that I'll likely never find the time or energy to make like I did with WandaVision. Speaking of which, gotta say I much prefer this to the WandaVision finale. Where many others have looked to this finale and the show as a whole and seen messaging that's contradictory or unclear, I instead see something that's nuanced and complicated in a really compelling way, while still also just being a fun, really earnest bit of superhero action. I love that every major action beat in the episode is about saving people, and how doing so endears Sam to the public. The public's view on superheroes in the MCU is one that we've been loath to really explore prior to now. And when we have, it's usually been tinged or drenched with cynicism. So seeing so many shots of normal people supporting Sam and looking up to him, it's really cool. The moral axis of the episode simplifies the entire conflict of the show down to the question of, do you want to help or do you want to hurt? In a lot of ways, that question almost exclusively dictates the morality of the entire wider MCU franchise, and it feels almost like it's hit a full realization here. And I don't just mean in the broad strokes, that plays into what makes the actual actions on screen satisfying. That move with Sam and the helicopter was awesome. Not just with the shield, or the timing, or the way it's a neat parallel to a similar move he pulled in episode 1, but that we factor in what I've been saying is the strength of Sam's character and his ability to connect with people. Having him call upon the help of one of the people he's trying to rescue is just so rad. Major Iron Man 3 vibes. The great thing about moments like that is that it brings these heroes down to earth not just in their personal lives, but also in their actions and costume. It's a reminder that even with the vibranium wings and the shield and being an aspirational figure, Sam and the people he's rescuing are people. Neither are just pieces on a board labeled fight scene, and the strength of people is the ability to communicate and work together. On a similar note, I like that Sam just bails on his fight with Batroc when it proves to be a waste of time. I love that the show has the opportunity to fixate on a punching contest, but is better than that. And the story and Sam know where the real priority is. There's a reason Captain America is defined by a shield. Sure, you can beat people around with it, but its job is to protect, and I love how, now being made of vibranium, the wings are almost an extension of the shield. Sam has tended to use his wings as a shield in the past anyway, but I love that bit where he saves the helicopter pilot by turning the wings and shield into a protective dome. Sam can't hit the hardest, but he can protect people. And that makes him the beacon of light in an episode and show full of super soldiers who are all pretty directionless, and fail to ultimately achieve many of the things that they want. I just love it. For the first time in the show, Sam feels like he's come fully into his own as an action hero, and he does that by letting his actions prove why he's the right man for the mantle. Of course, he does this not just with action, but also with words, and man, that speech. That's kind of everything I've ever wanted, but also absolutely not that at all. Sam is still a very idealistic person, and many have pointed out that it's idealistic on the part of the show to think that a speech like this can really have the full effect that Sam wants it to. But whatever, man, I don't care. Do you understand how cathartic it is for me to see a hero in the MCU, heck, any modern superhero property, finally, truly speak real truth to actual power? I didn't think we'd ever get that in anything. Yes, I understand that I'm settling for something like the bare minimum, or more depressingly, that the bare minimum looks like a victory in a world where the government was always going to be the bad guy that kept their power in the end. But like, the fantasy that someone could sit the government down and sway them even slightly with words is one I'm happy to indulge. You can move borders is not the progressive statement that we shouldn't even have borders is. You could feed 1 million people with a phone call isn't as powerful as the demand that that happen would be. But it is powerful to have a superhero, the new black symbol of America, look these people in the eye and say, do better. To lay out for them and viewers at home that the people with the power to enact real change are consistently failing to step up or consider those who they're affecting, and that even in a world of superheroes, those things have to stop or else they'll eventually create a monster so bad even their symbols can't bail them out or won't want to. This isn't Wonder Woman 84. Sam doesn't fix the world with a speech, but he uses the opportunity to point the global discussion in the direction of real material change, and that's not nothing. Also, let's not forget that Sam is a smart guy. I think he knows he can trap the GRC members with the power of optics. The world's eyes are on them as he makes this speech, and turning him down afterwards would just put egg on their face and hasten the rise of another Karli. Speaking of Karli, let's really talk about her. By the start of this episode, Karli's just let her empathy die completely. And while I think Sam and the show agree with her innate belief that the world is better off embracing its nature as a global community, I also hold that the story is making a point about how we have to balance prioritizing community and the individual. Karli doesn't care who dies if it means the community-wide change she wants is enacted. And I'm sorry, even if the change you want is for the better, that is just cult mentality. She doesn't even value her own life, and as push comes to shove, she increasingly sees death as the only option, the only course of action that will net any kind of result. And that's just such a deeply, deeply cynical way to think. Karli is widely seen as the most underserved character of the main cast, and I can't really disagree, if only because the early half of the show really let her down as far as showing in detail how she got to the headspace that she's in. But I'm mainly in agreement with that sentiment because the things being said with her here are interesting, even tragic, and I just want them to be bolstered. Karli is trapped by her ideology, and by constantly, cruelly taking things and people away from her, the world is not helping her escape that trap. Sam is the one person opposing her who is, and she ultimately has to go down because she can't recognize that. Sam isn't 100% with her, and so he must be 100% against her like seemingly everyone else in the show is. It's a sad, scared perspective held by a sad, scared teen girl. And this is why even in death, Sam advocates for her. Karli is a child who spent too long mad and scared and now doesn't know any other way to live than to lash out at anything that might impede her cause. Even in her last moments, she dies not on her own terms, but as a victim of a player in the system trying to manipulate her. I think Sharon being the one to kill Karli is very deliberate, and their conversation is very telling. Sharon was screwed by the exact same system that screwed Karli, but rather than tear it down, Sharon would rather forge a new system with herself on top. She talks a big game about having Karli's interests at heart, but when Sam is in the room, Karli becomes a liability and Sharon puts her down without a second thought. In a lot of ways, Sharon is also coming from a place of innate fear, born from systemic abuse. But while Karli channels her fear into prioritizing a noble goal over individual lives, Sharon channels hers into building a cocoon of power around herself. Sharon's power now matters more than anything else, and Karli leaves the world as a consequence of Sharon's need to forge a system. That's 2 prongs of our completely metaphorical and facetious devil's trident mentioned, but what about point 3? The weird, blunted, bendy one. This metaphor was a mistake. The handling of John Walker is probably my least favorite thing about the episode. Admitting up front that I've spent this entire series of videos being way more charitable toward Walker, and that outside of his grisly revenge kill, which is a tactic the internal morality of the MCU usually frowns on wholesale, objectively speaking, the guy hasn't done all that much worth condemning with punitive justice. The dude is a sap, a rube, a guy with his heart in the right place but his head firmly in the wrong, and as of this episode, all that remains true. I'm not gonna complain on principle that he got a redemptive moment, since I like nuance and I don't think his character is gonna stay in the hero position indefinitely. But I will complain that the speed at which we take him from a brutal enemy last week to a friendly helper making jokey jokes with Sam and Bucky is whiplash-inducing. I like that losing Lamar and snapping in episode 4 didn't turn Walker into a crazy person forever, as would usually be the trope. I like that after a comparative victory, he's back to having a bit of confidence and levity. Not necessarily saying I'm happy for him, I just like that his character is allowed to feel human by bouncing back from that. He didn't get a redemption arc, he just kinda snapped out of a rage and then did what his character naturally would. Walker hasn't actually grown or changed at all, and I think that's very much the point. In his last scene, this man has snapped back to being the same person he was at the very top of the series. And you gotta wonder if there's any escape for him, or if the government has fashioned him into a tool with one purpose forever. Personally, I think where we leave Walker is actually really effective. I just wish the tonality of his role here played with a little bit more tact and self-awareness. So basically what I'm saying is cut the whole Lincoln thing. What I really like though is the implication that through Val, Walker is going to continue operating outside the government. I wish the show was a bit more overt about Val's position as an outside actor to the system, since we still have no clue who's really backing her, if anyone. And in fact, I've seen a lot of less favorable reads of the episode, where people with so little to go on assume that she must be a government actor. But assuming I'm right and that Val isn't really associated with the US government at all, what I love about it is that it continues the trend of the show, and that there are now no actors for the government among the proactive main cast members. Everyone in this episode who manages to score any kind of win, they're all stuck in a very interesting space, where they're free agents, but also on some level in a position where the government maintains a degree of control over them. Sam is still working adjacent to the government, and while them tacitly accepting him as Captain America after he saves their lives is more of a convenience than a necessity, if they ever lock horns, that's gonna give Sam some grief, ditto Bucky. Zemo gets what he wants, gets the last laugh in Val's words, but he's literally a prisoner of the state. Sharon is going to have to at least play the part of a loyal agent again in order to keep her power broker racket going, and Walker is still an easily malleable staunch nationalist. All of them get to end the show with an earned sense of accomplishment, but depressingly it's only because they're willing to game the system rather than tear it down that they avoid Karli's fate. Say what you want about the political message on display there, Lordy knows it's far from ideal, but I really like that as a bit of storytelling, and it's kind of the ending this show seemed like it was inevitably building to upon reflection. I wouldn't describe it as an anti-revolutionary ending, so much as it's depressingly true to life, in the sense that individuals gaming the system seems to be the only reliable way to score a victory. Karli's so married to her cause over any individual relationship or safety that she's willing to die, so she dies. Martyrdom is what she set herself up for, and despite their hesitation, the other Flag Smashers knew the risk when they got behind and didn't bail even after second thoughts. The cause eclipsed life itself, and for people to whom this is true in reality, I imagine a similar outcome is what many expect to happen. Revolutions take decades or even centuries to really stick for a reason, and that's because the system is so fortified that anyone who's not the most dedicated still have to live within it to a degree. It's also potentially a mixed message to admit that Sam was only able to get his message across and impart any change because Karli escalated her violence to such a degree. But again, it's only confusing in the way reality often is. Because it's not just true that the violence was necessary for Sam to get through with his words, but he also had to stop the violence. If Karli's violence toward the GRC had succeeded, if she'd killed even one of those politicians before dying herself, Sam could never have hoped to have gotten through to them, or possibly even the public, about Karli actually having a point. Sam so actively opposing the violence was just as necessary as the violence itself. TLDR, I don't think the show condemns revolutionaries on principle, but I think what it does have to say about the fate of many revolutionaries is a bit of a tough pill to swallow. On a cheerier note, I did not expect a whole Isaiah Bradley section of the Captain America Museum. I lost it at that hug, and I know you did too, don't lie to me. Everything we've done with Isaiah Bradley in the past 2 episodes has just been so cathartic and unexpected, especially having spent episodes 3 and 4 worried that we wouldn't touch on him again. It just fills me with an indescribable joy to see someone so beaten down by racism and abuse finding that optimism and hope and closure, while importantly never being asked to forgive the country or the system which hurt and dehumanized him. In a show full of highlights, Isaiah has been the narrative highlight for me through the whole thing, and I wouldn't change a thing about what's done with him. In spite of some comments to the contrary I've made over the course of these videos, I do think once we get to the end of the series, you really couldn't justify not having it be a two-hander between Sam and Bucky. I would call Sam the de facto protagonist, but Bucky's story and choices inform his, and vice versa, in a way that can't really be separated. It's kinda like a Pixar movie in that way. I began this show caring almost nothing about Bucky Barnes as an individual character, but seeing him at the Wilson family cookout at the end, I gotta say I don't think I've ever been happier for a character in the MCU. I think it's a common opinion that his final scene with Nakajima should have gone on longer, not necessarily that we should have gotten any glimpse of Yuri's reaction. I like the idea that that's for Bucky, not the audience, but I think we should have just sat in the moment for maybe a couple more seconds. Frankly, it feels like that sequence is in a rush to finish itself, and that's a shame. With his therapy visits seemingly done, his amends made, and his relationship with the past squared, Bucky is finally truly free for the first time, and in that sense is maybe the freest person in the show. How he uses that freedom beyond helping Sam is something I'm eager to see in the future, but it feels like he's finally in the place he seemed completely incapable of letting himself reach back in episode 1. We've covered a lot here, yet finishing off now still feels like cutting myself short. So, before I call it quits, I'm gonna expand a bit more about why Sam's journey to captainship impacted me so heavily. I know a surprising amount of people who feel, as Isaiah did, that Sam claiming the title is a facet of the show walking back its own thematic ideas, invalidating Bradley's experiences and the overall notion of systemic racism, and having Sam ultimately choose representing a country that hates him, that hates me, throwing his weight and ideals behind it and betraying what's right in the process. But here's the thing, to me that couldn't be further from the truth. When Isaiah calls Sam something special at the end, I don't read a story looking to excuse itself for trying to reframe the stars and stripes for the sake of a franchise. I see Isaiah reaching an understanding which Sam, and I assumed the audience, reached in the previous episode. That being that Bradley's suffering, any black person's suffering, done in the service of this country, which we're stuck calling home, would really just be suffering for its own sake if we couldn't ultimately find a way to claim that home as ours. I mentioned the importance of Sam's nephews last week, 2 little black boys who don't yet understand that their country hates them, and can see the value of the shield as a symbol that's purely positive. If Sam himself can hold that symbol, be that symbol on the world stage, then that's something. That's an idea for black people to hold on to and find some hope for a better future in. It doesn't remotely come close to solving the world's problems, but it's a lot of impact for one man to have. That's what he can at least try to offer the world by being Captain America. Let's be really real for a second. Black people built America. Even if it hates us, we are this country. Its symbology and ideals are ours to utilize as much as anyone else's. That's what a black Captain America can say to the world. And after seeing it in action, I think Isaiah gets it. I assumed most of the viewers got that too, and that the show was not by extension claiming that Bradley, Karli, or Sharon were somehow wrong to be bitter towards systems of government and America's in particular. It was frankly something I felt incredibly cogent and affirming, though I suppose it assumes a lot of the audience's ability to infer from visual encoded language as well as the performances. I don't know, I feel like I sound really dismissive right now toward a bunch of people whose sour reaction to this narrative are valid, but this is really a case where with this specific theme, I feel like I was watching a different show to certain people. And I don't know, I feel like if I can get some people to empathize better with the way that I absorbed it, I might be putting some small bit of good back into the world, as I feel this show attempted to. This show, even when it can be sloppy in its plotting or unclear in its thematic messaging, is just a piece of work that I have a massive amount of respect and appreciation for. That it pushes on the issues it does with the intensity that it does, whether it always lands on a side of them I agree with or not, is a step forward for comic properties as a whole, but especially the MCU, and much like the creative flourishes of WandaVision, bodes well for Phase 4 feeling more substantial and experimental in its storytelling. If I had to pick a favorite and least favorite episode, it'd probably be 5 and 3 respectively, but uniformly it's been a great character study, bolstered by some much welcome world building and a multifaceted look at a large array of ideas. For me, it's easily just as good as other shows seen as the top tier of comic book adaptations, and it's been a really engaging and rewarding follow for 6 weeks. I'm more than happy to hear Malcolm Spellman is writing Captain America 4, and I can't wait for what the rest of Phase 4 has to bring us. But what about you? How do you enjoy the finale and the show as a whole? Did it stick the landing better than WandaVision or no? How was following these videos week to week, and would you like to see me do the same for Loki? Let me know down below, give a like and subscribe while you're at it, and I'll see you in the future.